Where we live primarily under the laws of segregation, and even outside those laws where we concentrated, there were always these commercial arteries that stood out. In Houston, the two main ones was Dowling Street and Lyons Avenue. Well, actually three, West Dallas. This street you can't tell now, but it was a fabulous street. All of the nightclubs, all of those commercial enterprises that were right along here. There were two movie theaters on this street. Drugstores with soda fountains. As a matter of fact, when you came on Dowling Street on the weekend, you mostly dressed up. You can't tell, but I remember that this street was as a matter of fact, I think later on we're gonna, right on that corner, as we call the El Dorado Ballroom. All of the big acts, Ella Fitzgerald, all those folks came here. Bobby Bland used to be here all the time. And of course, Lightning Hopkins played for free, just up and down this street and in this community. Never got the acclaim in this city that he had worldwide until after his death. And that's why this mark has been placed here. He was acclaimed worldwide in terms of his musical genius. And he's he was sort of almost a native Houstonian. He wasn't born here, but most of his musical life was spent here. And then he branched out over the world. But if you can fix in your mind a bustling street with much traffic, a business in every block, on both, that's what Dowling Street was. Most of you know of that period of time where the Panther Party came to birth in this country and the ensuing situations with police departments. Well, that happened in Houston also. There was an organization called People's Party 2 that actually was not an official Panther chapter, but that's another little story. It was a Panther chapter in every other aspect except officially. Had a headquarters on the corner right down there, street down there. The building is no longer there. But after about 2 weeks, that started when, as the young men were selling the Panther newspapers on the street, there was an attempted arrest. And on that Friday evening, somehow the commotion attracted many people from the community. When I got up here that Friday, I saw about 400 people in and around that area where the El Dorado Ballroom is. There must have been about 100 police on one corner, diagonally about 300 or 400 people on the other corner. There was a standoff when the police attempted to arrest the leader of that organization, Carl Hampton, the man whose picture or image you saw on the building. They were not allowed to arrest him because in the attempt, when they pulled pistols, he pulled a pistol. So the crowd gathered because of that commotion. When the police called for backup, all the police came in the area, so all the people came out. They didn't arrest him. For the next 2 weeks, the city was frozen as folk waited to see what the next thing was going to be. Carl Hampton, for about a week, was in hiding. And then he came back. Every day, the media was here because there were people from the headquarters patrolling, doing what they call security patrol with weapons, marching in front of the headquarters. So the whole city was waiting to see what was going to happen. On July 26th, on a Sunday evening, then the following, after 2 weeks, the police entered this church. They were inside on the second floor, and you can't, those in the back can see that little flat part of the building sticking out. They were also on top of that. At the moment the shots were fired, I happened to be standing at the back of that building, attempting actually to get out of the area because I knew what was about to happen. And when the shooting started, I elected not to leave. But anyway, Carl Hampton, this thing started with the police creating a diversion by sending emergency vehicles with sirens blasting down that side street. And the attention of the people on patrol was captured, and the police were able to chase two of the guys into a church. Went in and arrested them. So when I got up here, Carl Hampton was holding a rally to collect bail money for those two people who had been arrested. As I was talking to another guy, somebody led Carl Hampton down this way, and I asked the other guy, you know, what was going on? He said, well, there are police in St. John's Church. I knew immediately, even though prior to that time, I was wondering if there was going to be a standoff because 2 weeks had gone on, and I started to think, well, maybe the police are not going to do what I think that they're going to do. Well, any of that was dispelled when I heard that the police were in the church, so I knew it was going on. Anyway, Carl Hampton was led down here at the corner of this store, Wolf's Department Store. He was in a position to try to see what was going on, standing at the corner of that store when the police opened up on him. He was hit immediately. As a matter of fact, as a side story, as he was laying there, and of course all hell broke loose, shooting all over the place. A Volkswagen came down Dowling under a hail of fire. A woman got out, pulled him into the car, and sped off under a hail of gunfire. Took him to Riverside Hospital, that hospital you left. They couldn't do anything for him, so they sent him to Benton. He was essentially dead. But on that evening, July 26th, Carl Hampton fell victim to a police onslaught that lasted actually from about 8:30 in the evening. It was just twilight. 8:30 in the evening until about 2:30 that morning. And there were approximately 3 other people wounded that night, several folk arrested, and that was the 3rd major incident in Houston involving the police. Of course, the first was the Camp Logan Army mutiny riot, whatever you want to call it, 1917. That's another whole story. The second was the police going on TSU's campus and shooting it up, and we'll talk about that when we get to TSU. And this was the 3rd major incident that captured not only the attention of this city, but went across the nation to complement those other Panther police confrontations, Chicago, Fred Hampton, in Los Angeles and other places. Houston is kind of left out of that narrative because we're way down here. But believe me, it was just as intense as what happened in other places. And so that's basically the story. Carl Hampton was killed right over there on that edge of that building. Police firing from inside the church, and on top of the church, the pastor of the church, the late M.M. Malone, said that the police broke in the church and commandeered it, and the community didn't buy that. Oh, let me just say this. Dowling was already dying. You know, I told you that early on, this was a very prominent street. We took much pride in it. There was a movie theater right down the street here. There was another movie theater here, and it was a place that you really wanted to be. Well, at this time, in 1970, Dowling was dying. Right now, it's a ghost town, but it was dying, and much vice had taken over. As a matter of fact, right on the side of this store, this street goes on down, there was an open-air drug market. Everybody called it the alley. And the guy who was in charge of it was called Tin Hat. So Tin Hat Alley. You could go down, open your trunk, and get a whole case of Robitussin cough medicine. Curb service. Put in your trunk. So the vice, the people engaged in vice didn't want the attention of the media and the police down here. So that was sort of a collaboration that we believe. As a matter of fact, finally, as this activity was going on that Sunday night, there used to be a Church's Chicken right over here. I happened to notice, we were standing in front of the chicken, I happened to notice that the guy in the chicken place, I guess, I don't know, maybe he didn't have a phone in there, but he kept coming out to a payphone. Finally, he went back taking his apron off and closed down. So he had gotten word. This street that evening, all traffic had been stopped at the freeway. No buses, no cars, in preparation to what was going to go on. And so there was sort of a collaboration between several forces to aid and abet what happened. One of them was the pastor, maybe the deacon board, but the pastor for sure, to allow the church to be used.
Project Tour houses basically started out with these little white houses here. There's 22 of them. We started in 1993, in which, well, let me just tell you a little story. I was on a tour, a bus tour actually, not a bike tour, with Shape Community Center, which is just a couple blocks down. And they had organized a tour of city and county officials to identify dangerous places in this neighborhood that needed to be torn down. And we went all over the neighborhood looking at abandoned buildings and so on and so forth. But then we, on the way back to the center, they stopped the bus at the corner up there where you guys were all parked just a few minutes ago, and they said that this was actually the worst place in the entire neighborhood, because at that time there were only 4 buildings occupied between Live Oak Street, Dowling Street, Holman, and Francis, which is the next bigger street over there. There were only 4 buildings in this entire area that was occupied, and everything else was just overgrown. So when they wanted to have it torn down, and I agreed at the time, but once I started thinking about the work of John Biggers, who you got to go to TSU, right, where he started the art department there. John Biggers did a lot of paintings about shotgun houses and shotgun communities, showing them in a positive light. And so it occurred to me one day that maybe this particular site here, since they kind of fit the architectural type that John Biggers reflected in his paintings, that this might be an opportunity to try to create a living John Biggers painting as a tribute to his work, his research. And so I started out with a group of artists, and we just started cleaning and clearing the site. As I said though, back then there were only 3 buildings occupied in this entire area, and had been that way for about 15 years. So you can imagine 15 years of growth around here. Everything was completely overgrown. We spent about 6 months out here cleaning up and just cutting down bushes and stuff before we even realized there were sidewalks, you know, in the front, and just, you know, it was a good discovery there for us. And but once we got the place cleaned up, then we started to look at, you know, how we could really honor what John Biggers talked about in his shotgun houses. And so the first thing we focused on was the architecture, honoring the architecture as it is, just cleaning it up. Secondly, we wanted to have artists that were brought into this community. So we started an arts program, which we're having an opening today from 4 to 7. The focus of this round of artists is food, and they're from all over the U.S. And so we wanted to have artists that were engaged in the community. So we started this program where we have artists come and do projects twice a year. Then the other thing that happened was while we were cleaning up out here, children from the neighborhood started just coming to help out, and we started informally mentoring. But then we figured there were so many that we had to kind of organize ourselves to address the growing needs, and so we established an after-school and summer education program that works with about 50 children throughout the year and about 90 during the summertime. Then while we were doing that, people from the neighborhood were observing and participating, and we were listening to what they thought the neighborhood should be, trying to build upon, you know, what the neighborhood needed. And someone suggested that while all the education programs and the art stuff was good, there was a need for housing. And so we had these first, there's 15 houses on this block here, which the front side are arts programming, the back side is education. And then we had the remaining 7 in the next block, and we tried to figure out what could we do with 7 houses that could address housing in a symbolic way. So we decided to set up a transitional housing program for single mothers, in which women live there from a year to 2 years, and it's just set up to be a transitional link for them to kind of move through, to help them kind of establish themselves so they can continue growing. And once that happened, then we were able to kind of expand out and build new houses, which I think you rode around the area where there's some new houses there. We've been able to buy some of the smaller old commercial buildings. The El Dorado Ballroom building we now own. We have a contract on the old Sixth Church of Christ Science, which is at the other corner of the Emancipation Park. A few other little houses on sites over there, and we have a few houses that are on Scott and Anita Street, where Robert Pruitt lives, somewhere over there. But I also want to give you a little bit of the other context of this neighborhood, though. Oh yeah. Well, the question was, you know, why are the houses called shotgun houses? The idea was that they're called shotgun houses because if you open the front door, you could shoot a shotgun all the way through the house to the back without, yeah, without touching any walls or anything. But actually, John Biggers, through his research, and that's why it was so interesting to engage John Biggers on this, because he found in his research that it wasn't for the convenience of a shotgun, that he found the origin of this type of architecture goes all the way back to West Africa, where in West African villages, the little huts were designed with the doors lined up for ventilation purposes and not for a shotgun shot. But also the extension of the porch was something that, you know, kind of traveled from West Africa into the West Indies, into the southern part of the United States because of the heat, so that people could cover themselves and work outside in open air. And so John Biggers brought a lot of information that made this project viable. But I want to also add a few other things within the context of this neighborhood. One of the things about having artists come here from around the world, I tell people it's almost like we're kind of reflecting back to the old days before integration, because before integration this neighborhood was segregated racially, but it was not segregated economically, and that was a huge benefit for this neighborhood. So prior to integration, there's a big yellow house down there where the Overtons live. And they tell the stories about, you know, in the 40s when Count Basie came to play in Houston, he would stay at that house because he couldn't stay, you know, in the hotels around. And there are other stories of great people coming to this neighborhood and actually staying in the neighborhood. So you'd have, you know, very low income people, janitors and so on and so forth, who were racially segregated, but you know, they were living next door to doctors or lawyers or teachers and so on and so forth. Dr. Huckabee, his little office is also in a little two-story brick building down there. But there's also a story of Dr. Covington, who was just on Dowling Street down going north. I think it was there's a great photograph, a beautiful photograph of him standing on the porch with Booker T. Washington. And I always tell people the significance of that was huge because, you know, a neighborhood that's segregated where poor people were within close proximity of somebody of the stature of Booker T. Washington was almost equivalent to Barack Obama when he was running for election, coming and hanging out in this neighborhood. The access to that kind of exposure is huge. So connecting that to what we do now with our arts program, it's really interesting to sometimes have our children or people from the neighborhood walking through, and at any given time they might run into artists from, you know, all over the U.S. or anywhere around the world, and that's kind of exposure that really benefits children in a very informal way. You know, so it's not so much about programmatically designed to help them. It's just creating an environment where things like that happen.
This is the Young Women's Christian Association of Blue Triangle branch, which was the first branch of the YWCA in Houston that was funded during World War II. It was placed here as a meeting place for black women and girls so that they would have a place to learn and for the recreation facilities. It was originally housed at 806 Clay Street, downtown, in the old Masonic building near Antioch Baptist Church. But this is the recent building, and they do have a historic marker here.
This is the Martin Luther King Community Center, and the reason I wanted to stop here is the former director, Magdalene Bush, recently passed away. And, you know, we talk about, you know, civil rights, but, you know, it's those people that are in the trenches working on a daily basis that really make, you know, really make the change. And she was one of those change agents that, you know, I had the opportunity to work with. I came out, we were trying to do a food project at Texas Southern with one of my classes. And so, you know, I talked to several different churches, you know, a bunch of different people, and Mrs. Bush was the only person that would hear us. And so what we started doing, we would collect food, and she would prepare it in her center, and we would go out in the different areas where homeless people and hungry people right here on Dowling and have these feasts for people. And so, you know, it's this type of energy that we need to kind of keep going, you know, that love thy brother, thy sister, you know. So I just wanted to stop and, you know, kind of pay a little homage to Mrs. Bush. And so not only was the center here that had a daycare, but she also developed, you know, housing. So there was some housing associated with it too. So, you know, fairly well self-sustaining.
When I was a student here in '67, we could have driven right down this street because this street, a major thoroughfare, because students going to U of H used it, bisected the campus. The administration and classrooms were on this side, the student activity center and the dormitories were on this side. You would have to in the morning wait patiently for gaps in the traffic to go back and forth, which was one of the issues that prompted the situation in May 16th and 17th, 1967. There were many, but that was one of them, the closing of the street that actually came about several years after I left. But most of you know about that turbulent period when there was student unrest across the country. You've heard of Kent State. Well, there was a TSU as well as Kent State. May 17th, about 250 police came onto this campus, like I said, from double timing from Jefferson Stadium, and for a period of about 3 hours poured gunfire into the male dormitories, which are situated right behind this building. Oh, this was a female dorm. Oh, yeah, Lanier, yeah. And poured gunfire because there had been student agitation, there had been student demonstration. That particular day, it was alleged that students had thrown debris at passing cars. Might have happened, I don't know. But I do know that under very reactionary and conservative police chief, I believe that he was waiting for an opportunity to show the nation and the other police chiefs how Houston handled its student unrest. And so that night, a police officer was killed right about where this glass is on this building. This building has been redone. Right about where that glass is, there was a flower bed that was sort of a pit. And he was killed by a ricochet bullet from the police rifles on that spot, a rookie named Louis Cooper. And the state proceeded to charge 5 students with that activity. Only one went to trial. Charles Freeman went to trial on a change of venue in Victoria, Texas. There was a hung jury. There was a 2-day trial. We took about 2 buses of students, and I don't know how many cars, to Victoria for the duration of the trial. A hung jury, and they eventually dropped the charges on the other 4. They were called the TSU 5. But again, you've been shown sites today where very sort of unpleasant things happen in Houston. That's not our whole story, but you can't leave that out as you talk about our history in this city, because at periods of time it has been turbulent. And as in that turbulence, we've had unfortunate things that happened, and the death of that police officer certainly was unfortunate, but it also unfortunately helped to speed up the closing of this street. 2 of the most prominent graduates of this school, even though the state has always cash-starved TSU, were the late Congressman Mickey Leland and the late Congresswoman Barbara Jordan. Both graduated from this school. Mickey Leland began his career as a student activist. We were in the same organization together. Never will forget the speech he made the next day after we found out that Dr. King had been assassinated. Right here, we had a big rally right here in the Student Center, and I remember he got up on a table and he made this impassioned speech, and he was crying, and he sort of like devoted the rest of his life to civil rights. But he was already a student activist. We were student activists together. And Mickey was, owing to his charismatic personality, was one of the spark plugs on this campus. He was a pharmacy student. He got his degree in pharmacy, and he really left his impact, his stamp, on not only TSU Houston, but on this nation in his work to try to feed the hungry and the poor. Of course, he died in a plane crash in Ethiopia, and they had his memorial service right down the street here at the gymnasium at the edge of the campus.
Just let me say, you might ask the question, it might occur to you, well, how do you know? Well, after becoming a student activist in '67, right up to this day, I'm active in the things that happen in the community.
Hi, this is Vion McReynolds, and we're just completing our first Tour de Hood with the Menil on their civil rights exhibit. What we did, we went to several places in the 3rd Ward, and we were on our way to the Gregory School. We didn't quite get that, and maybe you might on May 24th when we do our next tour. Our first stop was actually a pass-by where the Buffalo Soldiers Museum is going to be developed. Our next stop was a Lightning Hopkins plaque. We went to several places like Project Row House, and from Project Row House we went on over to the hospital that was developed for blacks in the area. Also saw the area where the first doctor right on Holman and Ennis was developed. First doctor's office actually was developed there. And then we went on to the Blue Triangle YMCA where many of the meetings were held for the civil rights activities. After that, we left and went down to the Martin Luther King Community Center, where the actual civil rights activities were taking place, where people were trying to take their own destiny into their hands. And actually, when we speak of taking destiny in their hands, we wound up at Texas Southern University, where students marched to Weingartner's to protest not being able to sit at a lunch counter and get a meal, even though they had the money. After that, we were planned to go down to the Gregory School, where we'll learn the history of the Freedmanstown first school that they actually developed there, their own school in the area. And so these tours provide a backdrop for much of the history that's taken place in the area. One of the things I left out was the Carl Hampton site where he was actually assassinated. And after we've gone on this tour, I found out there was almost a whole week of activities that led to the culmination of his assassination there. So there's a lot to learn out here about Houston, and the only way you can do it, or at least one of the ways I do it, is tour the hood.